The ambulance was still in my driveway when the paramedics reached my wife by phone. She heard them out, asked whether it was truly serious or just one of his spells, and told them she'd come first thing in the morning after a decent night's sleep. She had a house full of guests. It was my son-in-law's night. Nobody could leave. 7 days later, my daughter drove to the hospital with her purse and a legal pad and asked the nurse at the desk which room her father was in. The nurse pointed down the hall. My daughter walked in and found a made bed, an empty tray table, and an envelope on the pillow. When she read what was inside, she had to reach for the wall to keep from falling. My name is Monroe Thayer. I am 64 years old, and for 31 years I designed and oversaw the construction of bridges. Not the kind of thing most people stop to think about. When you cross a river at 70 miles an hour without your hands tightening on the wheel, that's the work of someone like me, someone who calculated every stress point, every load variance, every place where the steel could give. I retired 3 years ago with a pension I had earned down to the last cent, and a reputation that still gets mentioned at county commission meetings. I know what it looks like when something is built to last. I know what it looks like when the foundation is rotting underneath a clean surface. I just didn't see it in my own house. I lived on 12 acres outside of Ashford, Tennessee. Good land, a main house, a detached workshop, a pond out back that I stocked with base myself. My wife, Ramona, had been with me for 36 years. We had one daughter, Paige. She married a man named Archer 3 years after college, a smooth-talking real estate developer who had never poured a concrete slab in his life, but had a handshake that could sell you the slab and the land under it. They had been living in our house for 2 years. Saving up, my daughter said. Getting on their feet. I said, fine. Take your time. That was my first mistake. The second was signing my son-in-law onto my contractor referral network. 31 years of relationships with builders and county officials, all mine, all earned, all suddenly available to a man who had done nothing to deserve them. He called it a partnership. I called it family. There's a difference I didn't understand until I was on a concrete floor fighting for air. It was a Saturday in late February, cold enough that the workshop heater had been running for an hour before I went in. I was working on a rocking chair, not for a client, for myself. I'd been building it for 4 months, one board at a time, from white oak I'd picked out personally at the mill. My plan was to have it on the back porch when my first grandchild came. My daughter and my son-in-law had been talking about children. I wanted to be ready. I was fitting the back slats when I felt it. It didn't come on like pain. It came on like pressure, like someone had set a heavy toolbox directly on the center of my chest and was leaning into it with both hands. My left arm went wrong, not numb exactly, but disconnected like a switch had been thrown. I set down the wood clamp very carefully. I remember that specifically. I set it down because the white oak deserved to be handled right, even if I was dying. I got to my phone by the workbench. My fingers weren't cooperating. I hit 911 first, gave my address, and the dispatcher told me to stay on the line. I hung up and called my daughter. 4 rings, then she picked up. There was noise behind her, music, voices, the layered sound of a crowd inside a large room. I could tell by the acoustics she was in the house, my house. Dad. Her voice was flat in the way it gets when she already knows she doesn't want whatever this is. I told her I thought I was having a heart attack. I told her I was in the workshop. I told her to come out. She was quiet for 2 seconds. Then she said, Dad. Archer is literally in the middle of his announcement. He just got the Millbrook contract. There are people here. She dropped her voice to a hiss. Can you sit down and wait? I'll send someone to check on you. I told her I didn't think waiting was a good option. She said, you always do this. She hung up. I sat down on the floor of the workshop because my knees stopped working. The rocking chair was 3 feet away from me, unfinished, tilted against the wall. The cold from the concrete came up through my jeans. I could hear party music from the main house. Someone had opened the back door, and the sound carried clean across the yard. I thought, this is how they find me. Right here on this floor, next to a chair I never got to finish. The ambulance came in 9 minutes. I counted. St. Marcus Hospital kept me in the cardiac unit for 3 days before they were confident I wasn't going to die on them. The blockage was significant, the kind that has a name, the kind that comes with a pamphlet. The cardiologist was a compact, precise woman named Dr. Braddock, who told me the truth without decorating it. She said I was lucky. She said a few more minutes alone, and I would not have made it to the driveway. She also told me the hospital had reached my wife by phone the night of my admission. I knew Ramona had gotten the call. What I didn't know until Dr. Braddock related to me, quietly, while checking my chart, was exactly what my wife had said. She had asked if I was conscious. They told her barely. She asked if the surgery could wait until morning. They told her absolutely not. She said it was a bad time, that there were people at the house, that she trusted the doctors to handle it, and that she would appreciate not being called again that evening unless the situation changed dramatically. Dr. Braddock set down the chart. She looked at me. Not with pity. Something quieter than that. Something like the look you give a man when you've just watched him understand something he can't take back. Your daughter called the next morning, she said. She asked about discharge paperwork. Not about me, about the paperwork. I signed my own surgical consent form that night. My hand shook, and the signature looked like it belonged to a stranger. The line on the form for next of kin had my own name on it. I'd written it there myself. The resident took the clipboard without a word. He was maybe 30 years old, and he looked at me for one beat longer than the situation required. Then he walked away, and I lay back and listened to the machines tell me I was still alive. The second night in the ICU, I couldn't sleep. My mind was moving in a direction I didn't like, and I couldn't make it stop. I had my phone. I saw a notification from my daughter's social media. She had posted a video from the party. 4 hours ago. I told myself not to watch it. I watched it. 32 seconds. In it, my son-in-law was standing in my living room, my furniture, my walls, the painting my mother left me above the fireplace, holding a bottle of Pappy Van Winkle 23-year that I had bought at auction 6 years ago and never opened. I was saving it for the day I paid off the farm. I paid it off 14 months ago. The bottle had been sitting in the cabinet because I was waiting for the right person to share it with. He had his thumb hooked in the neck of it like it was a $6 gas station wine. He said, "Found the good stuff." Old Monroe was hiding it. He laughed and pulled the cork and took a long pull directly from the bottle. Then he looked at the camera and said, still grinning, "He's probably up in that hospital bed right now, wondering where his whiskey went. Tell you what, he can wonder." My daughter laughed, off screen. My wife said something I couldn't make out, but her tone was easy and light. I put the phone face down on the tray table. I lay on my back and looked at the ceiling tiles, and thought about 31 years of bridges. I thought about load calculations. I thought about how you test a structure by putting real weight on it and watching where it gives. I thought about how sometimes you find out the whole thing was hollow from the beginning. Then I sat up, I picked up the phone, I called my attorney. He is a man I have known for 22 years, careful and unhurried. He picked up on the second ring. He had already heard through a mutual friend that I'd been admitted and had been waiting for me to call. He said, "Monroe, what do you need?" I told him. He asked once if I was sure, not because he thought I was wrong, but because he needed to hear it said out loud, with my full mind behind it before he put pen to paper. I told him about my daughter's tone when she hung up on me. I told him what the nurse had relayed about Ramona. I told him about the video and the bourbon. He was quiet for a moment, then, "I'll be there in an hour." He brought documents we had drafted 4 years ago in his office on a slow Tuesday afternoon, what we had called, half-jokingly, the lockout protocol, a revocable trust, asset transfers, the mechanism to remove my name from every joint account, every deed, every line of credit my wife and daughter and son-in-law had been drawing against like it was their own personal account. I signed everything in the cardiac unit at 2 in the morning. The night nurse, a woman named Nell, who had been quietly kind to me since I arrived, looked at the stacked papers on my tray table and said nothing. When my attorney left, she brought me a cup of coffee I hadn't asked for and set it down without comment. By 6 in the morning, every account they could touch held exactly $1. My wife's card, canceled. My daughter's access to the household account, canceled. My son-in-law's access to my contractor network, revoked. The deed to the property, transferred to the Thayer Family Trust, sole beneficiary me. I left before sunrise. On the pillow I left an envelope with a single sheet of paper, 3 sentences. The first said I had heard everything. The second said not to look for me. The third said the house was no longer theirs to come home to. My daughter arrived at the hospital 7 days later, with her purse and a yellow legal pad, looking, according to Nell's text message, mildly inconvenienced. The expression of someone running an errand they'd rather delegate. She asked which room I was in. Nell pointed down the hall. My daughter walked in, saw the made bed, turned around. Nell said I had been discharged. My daughter said that wasn't possible. Nell said it had happened. My daughter asked to speak with someone in charge. Nell said she was as in charge as anyone my daughter was going to find this morning. My daughter opened the envelope. She read it standing up. Then she sat down on the edge of the empty bed without seeming to realize she'd moved. She called my phone. One ring, then a message telling her the number was no longer in service. She called again, same message. Ramona arrived 40 minutes later. She tried her credit card at the hospital vending machine before she'd even gotten inside. Declined. She tried to access the bank account from her phone. The access code had been changed. She called the bank. They told her the account had been restructured by the primary account holder, and her access had been removed. She asked when. They said 6 days ago. She asked who had authorized it. They said Monroe Thayer, in person, with proper documentation. According to Nell, my wife sat down on a lobby bench and stared at the floor for a very long time. What followed over the next 2 days was documented by the private investigator I had retained 3 weeks before my heart attack, because I had suspected something was wrong for a long time, even if I hadn't been able to name exactly what. My son-in-law tried to use my contractor referral connections to close a deal he'd been working for months. Every call went nowhere. The builders didn't know him without my name behind him. He tried the business card I'd extended to him, linked to my construction account, at a restaurant where he was taking a client to lunch. Declined. He set it on the table and attempted to look unconcerned. The client left before the food arrived. My wife went to her salon that Friday as she did every Friday. Color, blowout 40 minutes under the dryer with a magazine. When the bill came, she handed over the card without looking up. The woman at the desk came back, whispered. My wife said to try it again. She tried. My wife looked up. She took the card back and held it in both hands as if it owed her an explanation. They returned home together and found a man from my attorney's office standing in the driveway with paperwork. He explained that the property was now held in trust and that they were not authorized to be on the premises. He gave them 90 minutes and an escort to collect essentials, clothing, personal documents, medication. The furniture was not theirs. The vehicles in the garage, both purchased by me, were not theirs. My son-in-law asked about the truck he drove. The man showed him the inventory list. My son-in-law tried to argue about a watch he claimed was a gift. The man asked for a receipt. There wasn't one. They left with suitcases. I watched the gate camera footage on my laptop in a rented cabin outside of Boone, North Carolina, a place I'd fished twice years ago and always meant to come back to. My wife was in heels, pulling a bag across the gravel, looking like someone in the wrong costume on the wrong set. I did not feel satisfied exactly. I felt like a structural engineer, watching a failure he had seen coming for years finally arrive. Not surprised, just confirmed. 3 weeks later, my son-in-law filed a civil action. Diminished capacity, his filing said. He claimed my financial decisions were erratic, a consequence of cardiac trauma and medication. He wanted a conservatorship petition. He wanted control of my assets granted to my wife and daughter. My attorney called when the papers were served. I told him not to fight the hearing date. I had things to show a courtroom that I hadn't shown anyone yet, and a civil hearing was the right place to show them. I flew back to Tennessee 2 days before the hearing and stayed at a hotel under my attorney's account. I told no one I was in town. The courtroom had the same logic as any structure, weight distributed to a central point, the judge's keystone, everything else arranged in relationship to that. My daughter sat at the plaintiff's table in dark clothes, her expression calibrated carefully to suggest sorrow. Ramona sat beside her with folded hands and no jewelry. My son-in-law wore a suit I had paid for. He sat slightly forward in his chair, like a man who was certain he was about to win something. Their attorney gave an opening that painted me as a man in decline. He used words like fragile and disoriented. He produced a statement from a doctor I had never met, who had reviewed my medical records and concluded that patients of my age frequently experienced significant cognitive impairment following major cardiac events. He presented my financial transfers as proof. My daughter testified. She cried. She described a father who had become someone she didn't recognize, who looked at her with confusion in his eyes. I sat in the back of the gallery and tried to recall the last time my daughter had actually looked at me long enough to see anything at all. I couldn't find an occasion in the past 18 months. My son-in-law testified with the confidence of a man who believes the audience is with him. He said I had been making decisions that endangered the family legacy. He said he had tried, out of genuine concern, to help me manage the business relationships responsibly. He used the word responsibly 3 times. I counted. When it was my turn, I came through the rear doors. Dark blue jacket, fresh haircut, back straight. My son-in-law saw me before my daughter did. I watched his face do 3 things in about 2 seconds: recognition, calculation, and something that was not far from fear. My attorney requested permission to enter evidence. The judge granted it. What he submitted was not complicated. Over the preceding 16 months, my son-in-law had been using my contractor referral network to sign commission agreements in my name, not the business's name. My name, Monroe Thayer, with my signature, which he did not have authorization to reproduce and which a forensic document examiner had confirmed in a signed and notarized report, was not my signature. The total came to $163,000. He had routed it through a separate LLC he'd formed without telling my daughter, a company with a name that meant nothing and a mailing address in Nashville. My attorney set the bank records on the plaintiff's table without ceremony. My son-in-law's attorney asked for a recess. The judge denied it. My daughter had stopped performing grief somewhere around the 4th exhibit. She was looking at her husband with a particular stillness, the kind that comes just before something breaks and doesn't go back together. When the judge asked my son-in-law if he had a response to the documentation, he said it was a misunderstanding, that I had verbally authorized him, that there was context the records didn't show. He said it the way a man says something when he knows it isn't enough but has nothing else. His attorney put a hand on his arm. The judge looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked at me. "Mr. Thayer," he said, "do you appear to be suffering from diminished capacity?" I said, "I appear to be the only person in this room who can account for where the money went, Your Honor." The petition was dismissed. The forgery documentation was referred to the district attorney's office. Before noon, my son-in-law was escorted out a side door. My daughter did not watch him go. She was looking at the table. My wife sat very still in the gallery with the look of a woman doing arithmetic she does not like the answer to. I did not stay to watch them leave. My son-in-law entered a plea agreement 4 months later and avoided prison by a narrow margin and a cooperative attitude. My daughter filed for divorce before the criminal case concluded. She found an apartment in Knoxville. She works in property management now. I find something fitting in that she finally has to deal with real estate on its actual terms. Ramona asked to see me twice in the months that followed. I declined both times. Not from cruelty, but from the recognition that there was nothing left to negotiate. The agreement she had signed in 1989 held. She received what she was entitled to. It was enough to live on modestly, which is how most of us live when we stop spending money that was never ours. I sold the property in Ashford to a family from Chattanooga who wanted land to build on. I liked that. I liked the idea of something real going up on it. I live in Beaufort, North Carolina now. A small house 3 blocks from the waterfront, old enough that nothing in it is perfectly level, but all of it is solid. The wood is good wood. I can tell by the way it sits. I have a workshop again. Smaller than the one in Ashford, but enough. I brought the rocking chair pieces with me in the back of a truck, wrapped in moving blankets. The white oak slats, the curved pieces I had steam bent over a form I built myself. I work on it in the evenings when the light comes in right. There's a boy who lives 2 houses down. He comes around on Saturdays with broken things to look at. A skateboard truck that wouldn't tighten, a fishing reel wound into a problem. Last week it was a bicycle with a snapped derailleur cable. We fixed it together, him holding the light, me threading the cable through the housing with hands that have learned to be patient. When it was done, he rode it down the block and came back with a gap-toothed grin. He said, "How do you know how to fix everything?" I told him I spent 30 years figuring out how things are supposed to hold together. He thought about that and said, "Cool," and rode off. I sat on my porch after he left. The evening was warm. There were boats in the channel and lights coming on in the houses across the water. I had a glass of sweet tea and nothing I needed to do, and nobody I owed a single thing to. My phone buzzed on the porch rail, Ramona's name on the screen. I looked at it. I thought about the bourbon and the party music and the bed I'd woken up in, alone at 2 in the morning, with a pen in my hand. I thought about the space on the surgical consent form where next of kin should go and the name I had written there. I picked up the phone and set it face down on the rail. I watched the boats until the light was completely gone. In the morning I went back to the workshop and sanded the last of the back slats, smooth as river glass. No grandchildren coming yet. Maybe they never will. But the chair will be finished, and it will be solid, and it will be here. Some things you build because they deserve to exist, not because you already know who's going to need them. That's enough. That is more than enough. And for the first time in longer than I can honestly account for, what I have is mine.